happen if I gave a non-league club in FM26 a giant stadium? Hashtag United play their football in non-league in England, but they've got over 650,000 followers online. But what would happen if they played at a super-sized stadium that could hold every single one of their fans, instead of the ground where they play now, which holds 3,500? Well, in today's video in FM26, we're going to find out exactly that, because that's exactly what I've done. And welcome to day one of our experiment in today's video, where our focus is going to be hashtag United. If I go to the club, what we are looking at today is no longer a team that just plays in non-league stadium, but hashtag United have moved to hashtag Lane, which you will see here holds 656,000 fans. There is also 200,000 season ticket holders, and we've upped everything, meaning that they should be able to sell out this stadium every single game. A quick note too, I have moved them to the National League South to make this possible, which is only actually one division higher than where they are now. But in today's video, we're going to follow their progress, as I'm assuming with the money they generate from this many fans coming to their games, they should make their way from the National League South. This outrageous stadium should be bringing in outrageous money, and it should be fun to follow that journey. But I know what you're thinking. You want to see this stadium in action, don't you? So let's jump to their first game of the season. And this was that game. It was actually a 2-1 win against Chippenham Town, but this is hashtag's new stadium. If we take a quick look around here, this is apparently 656,000 fans, all seated in a giant stadium. To go and get the aerial view, I have to go quite high up into the sky. This is their mammoth stadium, I assume somewhere in Essex, for hashtag to play their games in the National League South. This is a non-league game, but just have a look at how many fans have actually packed in. Should we go and sit in the most top, furthest away seat in the stadium and see what the view looks like from the very top here? Let's go. I mean, actually, we've got higher even to go there. Let's go and stand with these guys who are up, standing and cheering at the very top here. This is the view that we can expect then. This, though, is the stadium, and the attendances that are going to hopefully buy a hashtag United from the National League South to the very top. I think the first thing we should do, though, is go one season into the future to see what their attendances look like and see maybe the increase in the finances from just one season playing at this massive stadium. I'll see you in 1 year's time. Okay, so after that first season, I have the league table here in the National League South, and hashtag, despite having that giant stadium, have finished 6th. They've not managed to achieve promotion. Now, this is still an over accomplishment. They were predicted to be relegation battlers, and they finished in the top 6, a 71-point season. To give you a quick peek behind the curtain, I've simulated the save without a manager in place to keep it as natural as possible. But at the different save points that we jump into, I'll add a manager just so we can see a few more details. You can't see things like the finances without having a manager in charge. So watching man, you're back up, you're in as manager, and hashtag with their massive stadium finished 6th, but their finances now look like this. Remember, they're going to be playing in the National League South. They've now got 42.9 million pounds in their balance. I mean, the summary tells a pretty clear picture here, doesn't it? We've gone from having basically nothing at the start of the save, and over the course of the year they reached almost 60 million pounds, where it dropped down to 42.9 million pounds. They've been given, because of their massive turnover, their attendances that they must be achieving, which we'll check in with in a second. They're in non-league with 27.5 million pounds and 275,000 pounds per week to go and spend. So even though they didn't get promoted in that first season, surely they're going to get promoted in the second season because they've got so much money to go and spend. Now, something interesting here is that when I go to the fixture schedule, I can click on a home game and I can see how many fans are actually attending those games. This home game here, a 2-0 win against Hornchurch, they had 551,175 fans attend. Can you imagine the Hornchurch players turning up with that many fans in to watch them? It's absolutely outrageous. And then you compare it to away games where there's less than 5,000 fans going, and even that is maximized for these teams because hashtag are bringing 3,400 odd of their own fans to the away games. Now, the reason that I said this was interesting, though, towards the end of the season, there was only 80,000 fans turning up to watch hashtag. 80,000, of course, is still ridiculous for the National League South, but maybe this is where the reputation of the club has re-altered itself because of where we started it compared to where it could be, and the attendances then reflect that. I imagine if we were able to jump into these games, the stadium would actually start to look kind of empty because of the difference between how many went, 80,000, and that maximum attendance. Either way, though, I want the experiment to kind of be organic and see what happens here. We gave them the ability to fill it up. What happens after that is going to be up to the FM gods. Let's go 5 seasons into the future to see what happens in the slightly longer term then. Now that they've got all this money to spend, you'd expect them to start hitting some promotions, wouldn't you? Let's come back in 2031. All right, so I did get a little bit carried away. We've actually gone till 2032 now, 7 seasons after we began our experiment. And there's some very interesting updates to bring you here. I'm not sure this is going the way that I predicted it to go. And I'm not sure that's even a bad thing here. If this means that hashtag crash and ruin because they couldn't cope with having such a big stadium, I guess we're just going to have to see that happen here. 7 seasons in, though, this was the most recent season for the club. They did win League 2. They are heading to the EFL League 1 for next season. They got themselves a 90-point season, so there's definitely been some club developments. Maybe in, what was it, 6 more seasons there, you'd expect a little bit more than getting themselves to League 1, maybe, but either way, they have been making progress up the leagues. If we have a look at the club here, though, this is where things get a little bit more interesting. Here you see the rise up through the leagues, look, and you can notice that it hasn't been promotion after promotion after promotion. It is a little bit more of a slow grind, slower maybe than if you were to give them a perfect player, as we've tried in some previous experiments that we've done, but they are nonetheless making their way upwards. The surprising thing, though, is that when you add a manager, which is Watching Man in this case, and go into finances, you find this. 7 seasons in with their massive stadium, the club are in £247 million worth of debt. They've taken out bank loans and all sorts to try and clear this and have found themselves in £453 million of debt overall. You go into the expenditure tab and you can just see somewhere along the line, and for reasons unbeknownst to me, maybe they bought the stadium or something, there is a month where they had an expenditure of £645 million. Now this seems to be last season here, but I can't see it in the last season breakdown anywhere. I am noticing though that ground maintenance is coming to £38.3 million per season. This is on top of this random £645 million payment that they paid somewhere. Now obviously this debt is a bit of a problem at this stage, and it has actually restricted them in the transfer market as well. If you go to transfer history, I was expecting them to spend all sorts of money each season. If you recall, they were given a transfer budget of just under 30 million, and it was over £200,000 in wages they were allowed to spend, but they just weren't able to do that. They did bring in Scott Sinclair after the first season, but they spent 22k, then it was 57k, then it was 130k. It's not loads. 74, 0 in one year with 0 players coming in or out, and then most recently £73,000 on players. This explains why it's been a bit of a slow rise up the leagues and not completely catapulting themselves to the top, spending all of that money freely throughout the save. I'm going to go and investigate to see if I can find out what that payment was on, but I suppose the question is, will they be able to recover from this debt to continue their upwards trajectory, or is this going to cripple them completely, and will they inevitably fall back down? Like I said, let's leave this sim to be completely organic and actually find out what happens, rather than maybe we predicted it, and that might not be what we predicted, and I think actually that's all right. Before we do continue though, a quick note on the attendances in League 2. They were bringing in crowds of 139,000 whilst playing in League 2, which is obviously very, very healthy. It's still obviously a long way off capacity, but actually as the club gets promoted and the reputation of the club increases, it does look like the attendances are also going to increase. One thing I haven't considered that I've just thought of is, I wonder if there are any attendance caps in any of these leagues, which means you can't have more than a certain number, especially as you go towards the Premier League. That might be something we run into, but I suppose before we can even worry about that, we need to worry about this debt. I'm going to go another 3 seasons so that we're 10 years into our simulation, and there we'll find out how they cope with this debt over the next couple of years. Okay, so end of season number 10 now. 3 years later, let's find out how they did manage to deal with that debt there. With all of that money that had come out, it wasn't looking good, but we're going to roll through and see what's happened. Here on the 1st of June, 2035, hashtag, it seems, have won League 1. I think this was the current season now. If we go to the league stage, champions. So 3 seasons later, they are going to the championship. So does that suggest that things have been fixed somewhere along the line? I guess I'll add a manager and we'll jump into the finances to find out, but on the pitch it looks like some things have been sorted out. In fact, as well, what I have just seen, transfer history, remember this is a League 1 team, they must have some money back because they have spent £63 million in League 1, £16 million on Alan Hornsby Edgar, which is a new gen winger who's got a fantastic goatee beard there going on. They also spent £13 million on Igor Tijon, who's a real player, look, as well as a few other players costing actual money. Sam Shelby is not John Joe Shelby's brother, although he does also have a fantastic goatee beard there. Is that just what they've all got? Jorthi Mokio is a brilliant youngster on FM26, very highly rated, wonder kid if you like. He's been brought in. He's still only 27 years old. record, and he's come to League One, which suggests to me that their reputation must have also taken a bit of an increase. I think this is the biggest clue yet, that maybe we're back on a solid footing in terms of money here at Hashtag United. I do also want to check as well some of these attendances. This most recent season here, let's go to the last game of the season. 81,000 fans have come in to watch, which is obviously very healthy, but that's not capacity of this 650,000 seater stadium that they've got there. And it does beg the question, what exactly has happened there? Is there some type of league cap on how many fans can actually attend the game? Maybe that's what's happening here. I'm not sure. Somewhere in the game, under the hood somewhere, something's happening that is restricting the amount of fans coming, although that is obviously well and above anybody else in the league. In fact, can I see on like stats here for club stats, team stats, what is the average attendance? Is that something you can see? Yeah, you can. Average attendance is 81,000. In second place is Middlesbrough with 25,000. Who's the smallest? Rochdale get 4,959. So even the record for the season was only 80 odd thousand fans. And obviously that is zero stadium sellouts, because that stadium is much bigger than that. I will just check, actually. They are still playing at the correct stadium, right? Yeah, they're still at Hashtag Lane. In fact, they've even, it seems, extended Hashtag Lane over the years. They're up to 722,000 seats or capacity for the stadium, and they've sold 76,000 season tickets for this season. Tom Huddleston is the manager. That is actually something that I probably need to make sure I keep an eye on as well, because when I add a manager, obviously we don't get to see who the previous manager was. How long has Tom been at the club? He's been there since 2034, when he was hired after leaving Millwall, and then he's gone on to win this League One title this season. The previous managers, after Jay Devereaux, the original manager in the save, left, was Darren Sarl, Emery Hughes, who I assume is the caretaker coming in. Yeah, can I hide the caretakers? I'm not sure I can. Gary Rowett came in for a little bit, and then it was Tom Huddleston who came in to replace Gary Rowett, who was sacked. That'll also be a fun thing to keep an eye on as we go up through the leagues. When that hopefully continues, they're going to the Championship next year. How long until Hashtag, with their massive stadium that they just don't really fill up weirdly, how long until they end up in the Premier League? I guess that depends on how much money they've got. So I have now added Watching Man as the manager, and I can now go across to the finances tab, and I can see that the overall balance is 138 million pounds, which has kind of gone up and down over the years, but is obviously up from the minus 250 odd million pounds that they were on before. They've also managed to wipe out all of their debt. The net debt is now at £0, although there is a little bit of transfer debt, but that's pretty healthy, to be honest, especially considering they spent, what, 63 million pounds in the transfer market. This tells me that even though they're not filling up the stadium, they are at least bringing a lot of money in, and it tells me that hopefully things are now back on this straight and narrow, and they're going to continue to improve from here. They're going to the Championship. Let's go 5 more seasons from now and see if Hashtag in that time can make the jump from the Championship to the Premier League. And here we are then in 2040, where Hashtag are indeed in the Premier League. Not for long, though. If you go to the table, they are getting relegated back down to the Championship. They've made the leap, though, from the Championship to the Prem. And then in this most recent season, they finished bottom with just 25 points. They are struggling to make it stick when it comes to the Premier League, which is evidenced further when you go to the history and see that they actually got relegated a couple of years back as well. They got themselves promoted here, look, relegated back to the Championship, had 2 seasons to bounce back up to the Prem, and then this most recent season you've seen that they finished 20th. Their best ever finish in the Premier League is bottom, and they've been there twice now. They also don't currently have a manager, which means that Tom Huddleston has been given the sack. But in that 5 years, have there been any other managers? I assume there probably has. Frank Lampard has been the caretaker a little bit. Jack Wilshere was the manager before Paul Warne was the most recent manager. He got sacked. Frank Lampard coming in as the caretaker is very odd here. Is that what his job has come to now? He's an under 21s manager here at Hashtag, and he sometimes jumps in as the caretaker. That's an interesting development. Jack Wilshere had the job before. He had it for a year and 249 days and did in that time manage to get them promoted from the Championship, finishing second. John Terry was the manager before that, and he finished bottom of the Premier League. He came in after Huddleston was sacked. I'm not even sure why he got sacked. He won League One, look, finished second in the Championship to get them promoted to the Premier League, and then lost his job, and John Terry came in. They're doing a bit of a tour of the old ex-players coming in as managers, and then they've also had a spell here with Paul Warne, who only lasted 152 days. He came in December, led them to finishing bottom and got sacked, and now they are without a manager. And it's not like they've not spent money as well. Aidan Heaven is there on loan, I think, but they have spent £96 million this past season. The biggest transfer in there was £20.5 million on this man here, Luigi Fanini, who was a right back from Italy, and he looks like a good player, actually. Pedro Fernandez Pacato, who I assume is also a new gen, a 6 foot, a Brazilian centre back. I wonder, actually, if I go go to hashtags favored personnel, I wonder if we'll see any interesting people on there. That's not something I've actually really looked at. If we go to legends and icons, Jay Devereaux is a legend. Icons are Ashton Muir, Ben Lloyd, Jordan Sample, and then some real people basically. Oh, Harry Honesty, look. Favored personnel, Barai Singano. There's actually not loads on there. Jay Devereaux is a legend, but they did get rid of him to replace him pretty early on in this simulation, didn't they? Quickly, before we have a look at the finances, let's check in now though with the attendances. Now that they're in the Premier League, I had this theory that the attendances were being impacted by the club's reputation, or there was some type of limit for how many fans can go and watch like League One football. Now they're in the Prem, so in theory there shouldn't be any limits, and the reputation of the club should be as high as it's been so far in the save. Will the attendances of this most recent season though, despite the club losing a lot of games, reflect that? If we go to the most recent home game, it does. There was 364,798 fans at hashtag Lane to see them draw to Brighton. Now that's about half full, which maybe reflects that they weren't very good this year, but does reflect that they're now a Premier League team. How many fans were there when they played like Liverpool at home here? Look, yeah, there we go. I thought that might be the case. 619,000 fans to watch them lose at home to Liverpool. Where's the United home game? There. Just under 560,000 fans for that game. Let's check the average attendance for the entire season here. Look, 535,390 is their average attendance. 629% of the cap. Is that like the cap of like what the lowest attendance can be? They've sold the stadium out 19 times. Isn't that every game though? 19 home games. That's interesting that this is counted as a sellout, even though we know that they've got more seats here at hashtag Lane. Hashtag Lane is a 722,000 all-seater nowadays, but 540 odd thousand is counted as a sellout. That's interesting to see. But this is promising. This shows that they are getting humongous attendances, and for me it should mean, even though they're going back to the championship, that surely world domination is only a matter of time. We're 15 seasons in now though. I think I'm going to give them another 5 years, 20 years of this massive stadium, and if they win the league it's a success, but if they don't it's a failure. Let's put that time pressure on them, and let's come back in 2045 to see if they can do it. And here it is then. It is 2045. It's the end of our simulation. 20 years in the future. But did hashtag manage to do the unthinkable and win the Premier League after starting in the National League South? Let's check in and see where they finished this most recent season. They finished 12th in the league. And I'm gonna say, past winners, Crystal Palace are champions. I'm gonna say it though. I don't think they would have won it if they've not won it in the most recent season. Past winners, it's Palace, Spurs, Liverpool, Spurs. And that, my friends, is a failure on the part of hashtag United. I thought they would have won it within 20 years, especially when you think about when they got to the Premier League or when they even got to the Championship. From then, you'd think that they would kick on. They finished 12th, though. Past position-wise as well, you can see they finished a lot higher up the league the year before last, I want to call this. But then they were yo-yoing between the Championship and the Premier League for all of the seasons prior to that as well. Again, I really thought that they would have kicked on, but they just haven't. They've not managed to win this Premier League then. And I'm even looking here and seeing that they definitely have spent money to try and achieve that too. £91 million spent this season. How have they spent in the previous years then? £327 million spent the year before last. Yeah, that must have been when they were in the Premier League. That couldn't have been a championship summer. Surely not, right? 136 before that, 79 before that, 111, 77, 73. There was a nearly £200 million summer before that. And then, yeah, 60 all the way through to when they were not spending very much back in 2031, 32. I suppose we should just check the honours as well. And I have noticed that they did win an FA Cup once in their history. If we go to the past winners here, look, you can see that in 2043-44, they were the FA Cup winners. So there is silverware at the end of this. And that is about the extent of what having a ginormous stadium can achieve for you in FM26. Before we do finish, we have to check in with who the manager has been over the years. And I can see now it's Roberto De Zerbi in as the boss. But if I go to club history and then go across to manager history, I can see that they also had Jürgen Samuel, who was an Austrian, in as manager for 2.5 years, basically. They had Samir Handanovic for 150 days. That probably, again, resulted in a relegation, and that's why they got rid of him. Frank Lampard also came in as a caretaker manager again. Kieran McKenna, and then we're back to where we last looked with Paul Warne as the manager. And finally, before we leave things off, I do just want to check that they were still having humongous attendances in the league. They were, look, just under 700,000 came to this Manchester United game here. And do you know what? Let's have a look at what it looked like playing a Premier League game in a stadium that big with, as it says there, the attendance being 700,000 people watching. How does Football Manager make that look? Is it any different to how it looked at the start of the video? No, not really. It kind of looks very similar to how it did before. I don't feel like the actual model, the 3D version of the stadium, I don't think it looks all that different, really. I'd imagine if we went and sat in that top seat all the way up there again, it would look fairly similar to how it did back down in the National League South. The final thing I wanted to do was to add the manager watching man just to check in with what the finances look like. And this is probably where we'll leave things today. Their overall balance is £715 million, which is obviously nice and healthy. And they've got a transfer budget of £250 million to spend if they want to. They really have these up and down peaks and troughs look over the months. I wonder if that depends on how many home games they play during that particular month, perhaps something like that, or when they have to pay the maintenance bills to keep the stadium up and running with that many seats in there. Either way, they have ended up with the best part of £750 million in the bank. And that's where we'll end today's adventure. Thank you very much for watching. Subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and I tell you what, if this hits 2,000 likes, I will keep simming this save until they win the Premier League, and I'll leave a little screenshot of it as the pinned comment if you hit that like total. That sounds like a good idea, right? Thanks for watching today, though. Leave me a comment down below, by the way. What type of experiment do you want to see on the channel next? I'm having fun playing with the FM26 in this way, and you guys, you seem to enjoy the videos, so it works for both of us, right? Thanks for sticking this out, though. I'll see you in the next one. And in the meantime, why don't you watch the video that pops up at the end of this one? See you later.